So just a quick little poll I want to take. Who here has actually heard of our office before, the State Inspector General's office? Just show of hands. All right, that's a good starting point. Now, how many of you think you actually know what we do on a day-to-day basis and when we get involved in our investigation? Anyone intimately familiar with or worked a case with us in the past? No. Oh, maybe? Yes?
No idea.
Oh, great, great. Okay. Now, how many of you think that I actually said AG instead of IG? Ah, good. Okay. All right. So, yes, we are in the State Inspector General's office. I'm so glad that you guys chose. I know there's a lot of great presentations going on here today, so honestly, we're so glad that you chose to spend the next hour with us. And we're really hoping that by the end of this, you're going to be able to raise your hand to both of those questions. So you're not only going to know who we are, you're going to know what we do, how we do it, and more importantly, how your office can partner with our office to make investigations more fruitful and to get better results all around. So that's really what our main goal is here today. So I'm going to get started. It's going to be a three-part presentation. My name is Katie McCutcheon. I'm currently our Director of Training and Deputy Chief Counsel. I'll be followed by our Chief Technology Officer, Matt Patel, and then rounding out the end of the presentation will be Jason Fazio, our Managing Investigator for Welfare Fraud. I mentioned this a little bit, but what I really want to do is, first off, like I said here, is I want to introduce you to our office. What is our office? What's our mandate? Where are we? Who are we? And what do we do? The second thing I want to do in doing that is really highlight the state resources and information that can be available to you as investigators, particularly what we're going to focus on today, and why I brought Matt Patel with us, is that we're also going to primarily focus on our capabilities in digital investigations, because we all know it's far and few between when you do an investigation nowadays where it doesn't touch on social media, or it doesn't touch on phone records, or it doesn't touch on GPS or something like that. Computer data. It's all in the data, and we have that knowledge and expertise in-house to help our investigations, which is very valuable. So that's the third purpose here. And then in doing that, you're going to hear us talk throughout the presentation about different case examples that we've handled in the past. But then really we're going to get in depth, particularly on an unemployment fraud case involving welfare fraud that we also capitalized upon our digital forensics unit in order to successfully prosecute that case. So we'll go in a little bit deeper on one particular case, but we'll highlight a number of them throughout the process. So starting with one, who are we? The current New York State Inspector General is a woman by the name of Lucy Lane. Lucy was appointed by Governor Kathy Hochul as the State Inspector General in the fall of 2021. She's highly committed to transparency and accountability. Two main things she did when she first took over the office is, one thing she did is she took all of our historical letters and reports that had previously been unpublished, and she published them on our website. So there's now a searchable database in which you can go on our website and see letters that we have written to agencies over the years, subject to certain redactions, but they are now on there. Secondly, she also created a complaint database that is also on there now. So on a monthly basis, you can go on there and see where our complaints are coming from. What are the heavy hitter agencies that those complaints are coming in from? So those are two of the major things she did when she took over office. She also previously served as the director of the Institute for Innovation and Prosecution at CUNY John Jay College, and she comes to us from having been a former longtime assistant district attorney in the Manhattan DA's office. One thing that often surprises people when we talk about our office is we're actually three offices within one. So if you look at the top left-hand corner of the screen, it says offices. There's a plural, right? Believe it or not, it's not a typo by me, although I did identify one earlier in the slides. I don't know if anyone else caught that. I did that on purpose, see if you would pick up on it. This one is not a typo. This is meant to say the offices, and that's because we are three different offices. So Lucy Lane is the State Inspector General, she's the Welfare Inspector General, and she's the Workers' Compensation Fraud Inspector General. Well, what does that mean and why is it valuable to you? The reason it's valuable is that we have the resources of all three of those offices under one roof. And we work together very closely in order to investigate matters. And we're going to get a little bit more into each of those jurisdictions as we move along here, but I just want you to realize that when we say the offices of the IG, it's really three different entities we're talking about. So where are we? We're all over the state. We have 6 physical offices here in Albany, which is where the three of us are based out of. We also will have one in Buffalo, Long Island, New York City, Suffern, and Syracuse. Like many of you, we always say, even though these are our physical offices, The cases don't get investigated typically by sitting behind a desk, right? We've got to go where the crimes are happening. We've got to be out on the streets. We've got to be doing the interviews. We've got to be doing the surveillance. So although we have 6 physical offices, we really go wherever the investigation takes us, even if it's up to the border of Canada. Who are we? I say we're small but mighty. Some people don't think that's a great analogy, but hey, having done 5 foot nothing my whole life, it works for me. So there are approximately only 120 people in our entire office. So as you'll see, our mandate versus the size of our office don't necessarily match each other. But what we do have is a wide variety of expertise in-house. So we have investigators. Many of our investigators are former law enforcement agents. So they're coming from local police departments. Some of them are former sheriffs. Some of them are former feds. So they're coming from a long history of law enforcement generally before they even come to our office. We also have investigative auditors in our office. Now, our auditors are very different than your general auditor that you're going to expect to see sort of in an audit function. Our auditors are working hand in hand with our investigative teams on every single matter. So they're there, they're not doing a random sampling of documents in order to come up with some sort of audit finding. They're going to be looking at every single solitary document to determine whether or not we can prove something beyond a reasonable doubt, right? So they're going to actually, they're looking at it in more that criminal sense that we need in order to bring our cases forward. We also have a number of attorneys. Many of our attorneys, not all, but many of them are former prosecutors, such as myself. I was in the Schenectady County DA's office for approximately 7 years. My last 3 years there, I was a financial crimes prosecutor. So many of our attorneys are also coming to the table with that criminal-minded background, criminal experience in the background. Our digital forensic unit, I'm not going to talk too much about because Matt's going to tell us a little bit more about that, but we certainly is a valued asset to our office and something that we can lean on heavily when we do our investigations. Again, going back to those 3 hats, one is our welfare fraud inspector general role. So as the welfare fraud inspector general, we have the ability to investigate welfare fraud. So what's that mean is recipient fraud, right? Is there food stamp trafficking going on in your neighborhoods? If so, give us a call. We might be able to team up on something like that. Is there an unreported income in the household such that someone's underreporting their income, such that they're lying on their applications, and therefore we've now got a false filing and we've got a larceny going on there? Those are all typical recipient cases that we have the authority to investigate. We also, because of our role, have authority over all DSS employees. So for example, where that might come in, you might have a DSS employee who is doing an inappropriate lookup on the computer and looking up the ex-boyfriend. Or worse, you've got an employee inside on DSS who is going into the computer system to give benefits to a family member who is otherwise not entitled to them. That's something that we would have jurisdiction over as the welfare fraud inspector general. Switching gears to our workers' compensation fraud inspector general, somewhat similar to welfare in that this does not necessarily have to have a state employee connection. So we have jurisdiction over anyone committing workers' comp fraud. So a couple ways that looks like. It looks like a claimant fraud, which is, in other words, I get injured on the job, I tell my employer that I can no longer do my job, I get workers' comp benefits, and yet I'm out on the side doing a side hustle and getting money from that and not telling workers' comp that I'm doing that job. That's kind of a general example of a claimant fraud case. Another one might be for the employer fraud, could be underreporting of employees. So in other words, I'm a roofer, think about that in your local community. I'm a roofer, I'm up on roofs all day long, and I have 5 people that work for me. Yet I tell the workers' compensation insurance company that I have 2 people working for me and they're administrative assistants. Why does it matter? It matters because you get charged your premiums based upon the risk involved in your job. So by lying to that workers' comp insurance company, you have now committed workers' comp fraud in order to lower your premium amounts. So we can now assess a larceny amount to that because it's the difference between what you should have paid in premiums versus what you actually paid in premiums based upon your fraud, right? So that's an example of premium fraud. Another thing that happens is every company generally that works in your community will have to file a form with your building inspector, building department. Sometimes they lie on those forms, say they have no employees, so that they don't have to have the insurance, when in fact, you might have eyewitnesses on site who said, yes, they had employees working here every day, they were controlling the work, right? Another example of workers' comp fraud. So again, think about that. If you've got businesses in your community that you have reason to believe are unscrupulous or are doing something, right? It's sort of what we call kind of the old Al Capone sort of prosecution, right? Instead of going after the drugs and the street crimes and the other things that happen, you get a tax accountant to come in there and now you have a tax case, right? So in other words, instead of having, being able to build a drug case or a gun case or something like that, you might be able to build a workers' comp case or a welfare case based on paper, right? You might not even need actual witnesses to come in and testify against those people. You might be able to just do it black and white on paper. Our third hack, going back to that original slide, is the State Inspector General jurisdiction. So this is also a bulk of our work. This is where it comes into state entities. So we have jurisdiction over all state agencies within the executive branch. Up here on the slide is actually what executive law Article 4A says is our jurisdiction. It's rather wordy. It says we have authority over all executive branch agencies, departments, divisions, officers, boards, commissions, and certain public authorities and public benefit corporations. What does that really mean? It means that we have jurisdiction over 100 different entities. Up here on the slide is just a sample of a few of the agencies that we have jurisdiction over. But generally, your bigger agencies that you're generally going to think about, we're most likely going to have jurisdiction over. What does that mean? It means we have the ability to investigate any employees of that agency. We also have the ability to investigate anybody that contracts with that agency. So there could be, even though you have someone you say, well, they're not a state employee, therefore let's not call the IG's office. There could be a trickle-down connection. If they are regulated by the state or if they're contracting with the state, there could be another connection there. Another thing, actually, before I get off of this, one of the agencies that's over here on the bottom right-hand corner is also DOCS. We have jurisdiction over DOCS. We actually work very closely with DOCS OSI on cases. But same thing, if there's any misconduct by state employees within DOCS, or if there's some DOCS records that might be of value to cases, that's something where we may be able to assist in obtaining information if it's a case that we can partner with you on. Under Executive Law 4A, what exactly do we do? What do we have the ability? I told you who we have jurisdiction over with, but what do we have jurisdiction on, right? What our purpose is to really investigate allegations of corruption, fraud, criminal activity, conflicts of interest, or abuse in any covered agency. So again, those are the things that we're looking at. Corruption, fraud, criminal activity for the most part. And with that, we can do a number of things. One, we will investigate the matter. One thing to keep in mind is we're strictly an investigative agency. So if we investigate a matter and we want to make an arrest on it, we're most likely going to team up with state police or local police authority to actually execute that arrest. But it can be executed based upon our investigation that we conducted. Or if it's a more long-term, long-scale investigation, we may be partners in it all along, and then the arrest is made. It's in the prosecuting agency that's then prosecuting it. So it's either the local DA's office, state attorney general's office, or U.S. attorney general's office, depending on where we think the case best fits. We also, I just have to put a plug for myself, we also do conduct training. So if there's any need for training in your area, please give me a call and we can try to develop a training module that might assist your personnel. There's a number of different ways to make complaints. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but we do have, we can get complaints in from any number of sources. They can come in from the public. It does not have to be a state employee. If somebody's a neighbor, if somebody sees something, they can call us and make a complaint with us. We do sit on a number of task force, so we also take in complaints from those task force, and also we'll team up on investigations there. So there's a number of different ways complaints can be made to us. This is generally how you can make a complaint. But also we're going to provide you our information. You can always call us directly to get a case started and to see if it's something that we could work with you on. So finally, what happens at the end of one of our investigations, like I said, we're strictly investigative. So if it's something that we believe is a criminal matter, it's ultimately going to get referred out to a prosecutor. If it's something that's an ethical violation, it will most likely go to the agency. It will also go to COLIG, or to something formerly known as JCO, who investigates ethical violations. And what's something different, a little bit different about our office, is that we also have the ability and the mandate to issue public reports. So even if something's criminal, after the criminal case is completely done, it's not something that we purposely make sure it doesn't interfere with the criminal case, but there could be an occasion where we may come back after the fact and still issue a public report in which we would report what the complaint was, what our investigation found, and then we would make recommendations back to the state agency to put things in place to ensure that type of conduct doesn't happen in the future. So with this, I know I mentioned a little bit, I touched upon our digital forensics unit, but I really want to pass it over to Matt Mattel, who's really going to go in a little bit more deeper about what our digital computer capabilities are within the office.
All right, thanks, Katie. Now, before we start anything and dive into our capabilities, it's, to really put this in perspective, it's really helpful to understand just the quantity of digital data that is out there. Can you guys hear me? You guys, I know it's a small room, so a little bit. All right. It's helpful to understand the quantity of digital data. So back in 2010, it was estimated about 2 zettabytes of data were out there in the ether. What that means for us, 1 zettabyte is approximately 50 trillion pages. Fast forward about 14 years till now, that moved from 2 zettabytes to 181. So a great increase. Electronic data is here to stay. I know you guys all know that, and we're going to continue to be in transition from paper to electronic. So for our main data, as Katie talked about, to effectively investigate fraud, waste, and abuse, and either of those, the 3 hats that we do wear, our office found it was important to establish a digital forensics unit to really support all aspects of our investigations. That digital forensics unit includes our digital forensics laboratory, which is right down the road here. Highly trained professionals that are accredited, leverage industry standard technology and processes, and also continued development through recognized institutions. And over time, we've established and maintained strong relationships with local, state, and federal law enforcement. So let's talk a little bit about, and we're just going to highlight what we're doing and how we can assist in your investigations. So this is really the realm that we work in, and the group of guys, the digital forensic experts at OIG, their day-to-day, right? So there's really three categories: forensic data collection, digital forensic analysis, and digital investigations. Digital forensic data collection and analysis really go together, whereas digital investigations is really an offshoot of that. So we'll start with the collections, right? Preserving, forensically imaging, extracting data from any electronic devices. We'll get into that shortly. Computers, phones, tablets, servers, databases, et cetera, et cetera. Really taking bit-for-bit images, something that can be held in the court of law. So we have a tactical team that works either on site or takes evidence back to the lab and basically does those preservations for us. Analysis, right? The analysis of that collected data. So we'll take all of those forensic images from the computers, extractions from the phones. They'll get ran through, processed with our forensic tools. Those tools will parse out metadata, identify trends, predictive analytics. Now with AI is also a part of that, helping with document review. So really leveraging technology to help the analysis and push forward the investigations. And then digital forensic investigations. We talked the collection analysis were coupled. Digital forensic investigation is really an offshoot. It's a broader process that encompasses technical analysis and further the investigation. So really the open source technology tools, leveraging them, utilizing poll cameras, analyzing IP information, social media investigations, as Katie touched on. So these are really the 3 areas that this group it really takes ownership of. So we'll get started with digital forensics, right? What is digital forensics? Well, it's really what we just talked about. It's the collection and analysis. So it's the process of identifying, preserving, analyzing, and presenting digital evidence and electronic data. So let's take a closer look into some of the data sources that we analyze. You guys are all familiar with these, right? I mean, our offices will typically acquire these channels, either save employee computers, save employee phones, phone records, email. A lot of these we've leveraged to assist in our investigations. But then also, on the other side, really, our law enforcement partnerships, working search warrants, whether it be physical search warrants on premise or electronic search warrants. You see all of these items here: the computers, the phones, the email. Well, a lot of them has been a trend in the field recently, within the past 5 or 6 years, that all of this is starting to move towards the cloud. You see it in the top right here, cloud data. Computers are moving to be not information is not being stored on their hard drives. They're actually up in the server. Phone backups, right? At our office, we have Apple iPhones, just like many of you probably do. iCloud backups. We used to find them as a great forensic resource that could glean information on messages, photos, et cetera, et cetera. All those used to be stored on computers through iTunes backups. Now they're stored up in the cloud. What our office has done is really work with law enforcement and use that as like a precursor, right? Maybe we're not going to do the on-premise search warrant at this point in time. Let's take a look at what the iCloud backups have to say. Just as good as taking a look at the phone. So, in addition to that, right, the email out there, there's Google Drive, Gmail, all of those services that are up in the cloud can all be accessed remotely and little intrusion. So these are a couple of data sources that we'll commonly see. With the digital forensic landscape, right, and this is a small snapshot, but this time on the landscape and some of the common areas that our digital forensic team has worked cases. Program installation and execution. We worked welfare case with Jason, on site on search warrants. Identified through some of the team that was there, through photographs that there were card skimmers present. Took a look at the computer, looking to identify some more information, more evidence of the fraud, identified a couple of applications that were being ran. Okay, we know that the applications were installed. Let's take a look at the prefetch. What the prefetch will tell you is really how many times those applications were ran and when they were ran. So we know now we know the dates and times for that, right? Internet history, always a good resource. Pornography, dark web activity, blacklisted website activity, personal activity. All of those we'll take a look at, and another welfare case. We'll stick to that common theme, but our office received complaints around identity theft and some welfare fraud. We'll look at internet history there as well. Identified a set of what are called full identity theft package, templates for credit cards, templates for ID cards, et cetera, download activity to those as well. So just a couple of areas that have been relevant to us. And then communications, right? I'm not looking at all of them, but with communication analysis. Fraud happening in the Brazilian community. We secured a bunch of cell phones. Communications were identified. They had access to WhatsApp. Our team had the ability to take those physical phones as well as the backups, decrypt those WhatsApp databases, and then pull the text message strings that were within. The problem was for us that those communications were in Portuguese, so the team then leveraged another third-party resource to actually do a bulk conversion of hundreds and hundreds of messages to help unfold some information around. So, while some of these sections might not resolve the case entirely, but they will identify key evidence to advance the investigations. Digital forensic tools. So these are just some of the digital forensic tools that we're currently using in industry standards, right? For computer forensics, EnCase, access data, Magnet, Intella, all great artifacts. Intella, we use it heavily for our document review. Has the ability to leverage artificial intelligence and predictive analytics to identify, really take that set of email and synthesize it down to what we're looking for. Has the ability to remotely access information. A lot of our tools, our interface access data magnet, really goes our work through the forensic lab. Mobile device forensics, and a lot of you have probably heard of Celebrate. That's probably the gold standard. But then there's, Celebrate doesn't always capture everything. We found that Celebrate is very strong with Apple iPhones, not so great with Androids or any flavor of. So we'll leverage another tool, XRY, and it's really kind of just understanding what each tool does and what information will be extracted. There's a million different combinations between the phone types, hundreds that are out there, the different operating system types, different operating system versions, and then what versions of the tool you're using. So it's really, really important we have an arsenal of tools out there, and you have an understanding of both of each of the information. So this is through on the mobile device side. On cloud forensics, I said a little bit earlier, a lot of end user devices are starting to move towards the cloud. The computers, phones, email, et cetera, stored in Microsoft 365. A lot of Exchange is probably the gold standard for email. OneDrive, a lot of folks are familiar with. AWS, backbone for countless amounts of applications that are out there now. iCloud we touched a little upon, and then Google Cloud as well. With cloud forensics, right, it's out there. It doesn't require the forensic team to be in the field, to be pulling the data, to be preserving it, to be analyzing it. All of that is done natively within the cloud tools. Security and Compliance Center is an example of that with Microsoft. So really versatile, and our digital forensics team does a great job. They're working with all of these industry-standard tools, and helping vendors, providing feedback, working with the vendors hand in hand, and really helping advancing some of these tools as well. So here's, I know everybody likes to see really what these look like, a visual, just to understand how complex these are. But each of these tools really helpful pulling. All these tools really do, you ingest the data, ingest a forensic image bit for bit or an extraction. It'll parse out every instance of metadata and just let you work with it, right? Through advanced filtering, Boolean search queries, predictive analytics, visualizations. It really just makes the investigations a little bit more palatable and a little easier to draw conclusions from. So on our top left here, I'm not sure if it says on our top left here, we have Intella. Each one of the metadata for the email categories and facets. We have on the network side Wireshark, the sniff packets, see what is happening in networks or our own network. Celebrate, right? Pulling mobile phone images, has the ability to parse out different types of applications, as well as the file systems that recover deleted artifacts. Magnet Axiom really it's more artifact-centric, where it will pull out everything, really give you a high-level snapshot. Here's a bulk load of all the passwords that are associated. Here's all the accounts that are there. Here's what the prefetch is, et cetera, where typically with these other tools you'll have to dig through them. And then we talk a little bit about the cloud with Microsoft Security and Compliance Center, and the analysis is handled. So we covered a little bit about digital forensic collections and digital forensic analysis. So what is a digital forensic investigation? And our office really handles, is a bread and butter day to day. When we're not receiving devices, we're supporting the group. Everything else digital, right? And it's a little different from forensic analysis. It's a broad approach. The stakeholders are the investigative team, the attorneys, our investigators, regulators, human resources, and executives. And it's just applying knowledge around electronic data to enhance our investigations. And here's the landscape we work in. Open source intelligence, working with business records, IP addresses, email addresses, geolocation data, digital currency. All of the blockchain is openly available for to see transactions. But how can we make inferences from there? Dark web resources. There are countless amount of open source intelligence resources that are out there. I would strongly suggest familiarizing yourself with them and really seeing where they can help advance your investigations. Undercover operations, right? Social media, that's a big one. As Katie said earlier, there's not a case that social media really could not help, or at least identify more information out to help us advance. Electronic surveillance, utilize the poll cameras. GPS, key loggers, cell tower analysis, all this electronic surveillance. Our team will pull that in, synthesize it, and help the greater investigative team understand really what information that we're dealing with. And then data analysis and analytics, really working with different types of data points, databases, extractions of different data from databases or provided as a result of some subpoenas or found in search warrants, really taking that information and making it useful to put together comparisons on a greater scale. So lastly, before I turn it over to Jason, here's a couple of items, workflow on our digital investigative workflow. So the investigative plan, we'll work with all the stakeholders, we'll identify the objectives, we'll say, what are we looking for here, right? Step 2, data mapping. Where is the information? That's really where our team is valued. There's a lot of value there, understanding where data is. Good example is Microsoft Teams, right? I mean, work with Microsoft Teams day to day. Some of us use it just for phone calls and video chats. Others use it as a communication for simply like the IRCs or the chats. That information is stored all over the place. It's stored in, the communications are stored within mailbox abstraction. If you're uploading a document, that's stored in the OneDrive depending. And it can all differ based on if it's a one-to-one communication or one-to-many communication. So but just understanding where the data resides is important to understand. This next step is we got to look at it and we got to analyze it. And analysis we talked a little bit about, but then reporting, right? So it really clinical or narrative. What is your audience and just looking to identify the key points there. So, I mean, with that, we've talked through a little bit about the group. We have strong partnerships with local, state, and federal law enforcement, and we're here to help advance your investigations, and we welcome the partnership. So I'll turn it over to Jason to talk a little bit about case examples.
Okay, so I'm Jason. I am going to hopefully bring this a little bit, bring what Matt said together into a real-world example of how we utilized a lot of the tools in Matt's office, along with other, obviously, standard investigative techniques, and kind of how we got involved in pandemic unemployment insurance fraud during the pandemic. So, anybody a victim of identity theft during the pandemic? Anybody in here? Any relatives? Usually there's somebody. Good for you guys. So, so that was a problem, obviously, during the pandemic. You know, billions of dollars were lost to theft during the pandemic. So, these are some statistics that we pulled from our case management unit as far as the increase. This was a huge increase of unemployment insurance fraud-related complaints that our office received, 418 during this time period. As you can see, most of them are related. The complaints were, my identity's been compromised. Somebody's using my identity to claim unemployment insurance benefits in their name. Where I kind of came in was that some of those victims were people that were receiving public benefits. So they're vulnerable New Yorkers as it is, and then they were in turn being taken advantage of in some way, shape, or form. And their identities were being used for fraudsters to commit fraud, obviously. So, as you can see, like I said, most of them were identity theft related. And then we also took on a lot of cases where individuals were pretending to be Department of Labor and sending out mass text messages and emails and that sort of thing. And some people took the bait, and they thought they were dealing with New York State unemployment, and sure enough, they were dealing with fraudsters, and again, taking advantage. So I'm going to zero in on one case that I thought kind of tied everything in together pretty good, and it was a great exercise that we went through on this case. So in early 2021, we received a complaint from the Albany County Department of Social Services where they took a complaint from an individual who was receiving public benefits, who was contacting the agency as people do typically. And the agency found that, hey, you're collecting unemployment, you haven't told us about that, what's going on? She said, hold on a second, I'm not getting unemployment. Must be a fraud or something going on. So she files a report. We say, hey, look, at this point we're taking in a lot of complaints at this point. So we said, hey, if this person's serious, they should probably fill out a police report as well, so that if they're not so serious about it, we find out, then we'll have something to kind of go back to. But so we had to fill out police reports, and we took a sworn statement at the local Department of Social Services, attesting to whatever the circumstances were. So after they got all that information at the local DSS, they sent it to us, and we kind of took over from there. What we did early on was we knew who our initial victim was, right? We reached out to the Department of Labor. I should step back a little bit. We basically are utilizing two different authorities that we have. That's Executive Law 4A, that's dealing with the Department of Labor, and Executive Law 74, which is the Executive Law for the Welfare IG's office, which deals with the recipients in this case. So I'm kind of operating both of these worlds, but that is the beauty of kind of our office, right? So what we did was we knew who the victim was initially. So we said, hey, Department of Labor, give us all the data points that you have with regards to this particular unemployment claim, right? So as you can see up there, there's a lot of information that actually comes in, right? We reduced it down to basically these couple of data points. We zeroed in on IP addresses that were used to make the claims and file their certifications on a weekly basis. We zeroed in on ones that were used very frequently on this data set. We zeroed in a telephone number that was used, and that'll come back again on the end, or in the end of this presentation, and then an address that was used. So we get all this information from the Department of Labor because they have to give it to us if we ask them, right? So, through this, we identify some of these IP addresses, what their internet service provider is. We're also able to identify from labor that the individual, the money is going into a particular KeyBank debit card account, because our contractor through Department of Labor during the pandemic for unemployment was KeyBank. So the fraudsters were receiving debit cards in the mail early on. So we were keying in on addresses because, as you can imagine, there were addresses in various towns and cities throughout the state where hundreds of UI claims were being reportedly living at particular addresses. So we issued a whole slew of subpoenas and kind of just waited around for those cases, or for that information to come back. But what we learned was that this particular fraud began at the end of October of 2020. And that's when the fraudster got on the phone and began their UI claim in the victim's name over the telephone at 9 in the morning. See, fraudsters get up early in the morning too, I guess. So 2 weeks later, essentially, the application is approved and benefits began being issued. Now, in my experience during the pandemic, the people that were out there committing fraud, they want this money, right? Because this particular claim, it was $21,000 was issued on one day into their KeyBank account. And that is UI benefits that were paid out on this person going back to the beginning of the pandemic, right? So they filed the end of October, they got benefits back to March 16 of 2020. So in this particular case, there was 21 grand that was released into this card on one day. Guess how long it took them to get rid of that cash on that card? Pretty quickly. But over the next 8 months, every week, the fraudsters were certifying benefits in this one and many other clients' names during that time period for another $32,000 in UI benefits. So we're like $54,000, I think, on this one particular UI claim. So as the subpoenas start rolling in that we had issued for more information, this is just a printout of one of the pages of the ATM transactions where the suspect was removing the money from the ATMs. This obviously is just one card, but what we found when we got the information back was that the person was just sitting at the ATM, just pumping in a UI card after UI card and taking as much money as possible at any given time. So 4, 5, 6 cards at a time. At each ATM, it racks up pretty quick. So I put this up here for another point, and that was we were really kind of trying to establish a little bit of a pattern of life. We wanted to see what this person was doing, where they were going, where they frequented, and that's when we actually enlist the Crime Analysis Center in a little while. But this was important because we kind of see a pattern, right? They're going to the same ATMs kind of repeatedly in a bit of a pattern. So that also comes into play in a little while. So one of the other things they gave us was surveillance video. This is how we knew they were just sitting at the ATMs making withdrawals in various cards. You know, this was a great piece of information. All these license plates are actually very relative to this investigation. I'll get to the white Mercedes over on the right in a little bit. But interestingly enough, the video is so clear actually from KeyBank, that Maserati over there that we seized. I was able to get the license plate off of that. There's a little emblem in the bottom that I was able to track to a car dealership in Georgia where they purchased that vehicle using Bitcoin at some point during this investigation. So I thought that was interesting. So they provided us that footage, and they also provided us phone calls, right? The fraud, one of the things that was happening during this fraud period is people weren't getting the UI cards fast enough in the mail. So what they would do is they would call KeyBank and say, hey, I need you to expedite my card to a different address. And if they had the right piece of personal identifying information for the victim, they could easily do that with KeyBank. So I won't bore you with this phone call, but this is a phone call of the suspect calling KeyBank saying, hey, expedite my card to this other address. Because I don't remember exactly what happened with the other address, but she did get the card. So, one thing I did forget to mention earlier, and I apologize, is that you know when DOL gave us this information, we said, hey, you know, based off of these particular data points, being those IP addresses that I referenced earlier, the telephone number, the address, and I said, hey, DOL, now, thank you for giving me that information on this one particular victim. Now tell me more about these data points. And telling me more about these data points basically led to this, right? So they returned the request for information, and through that review, we identified, sorry from the waiter, that those particular data points were utilized to touch 37 different Social Security numbers in the New York State unemployment system. Almost $1 million in benefits were issued on those particular Social Security numbers. The myny.gov accounts, you guys all know what those are. You need that to log on to any state site. 342 unique IP addresses, so there's a lot of activity. A lot of those are cell phones. T-Mobile's constant update of IP addresses, so that's kind of why there's so many. 57 unique phone numbers, 18 unique mailing addresses. As I alluded to earlier, like this fraud evolved over time, right? Because early on, nobody kind of knew how to get the money. So they thought, the fraudsters thought they needed the debit card to be mailed to them, and they needed to use the debit card to get the money, which was true early on, but then we figured out that that wasn't really working, so then it became, you can do direct deposit. And once that happened, forget about it. But there was an evolution. It was all these mailing addresses first, because nobody knew how the money was coming. Once they realized you could do direct deposit into whatever bank account, all of a sudden everybody has Chime and Cash Apps and all that stuff, and that just made it actually a little bit more easier. But anyway. So that was the second batch of information that the Department of Labor gave us. And we kind of suspected this was going to be the result, right? Everybody, I don't know how many people we interviewed during this time period, but and maybe you guys too, I'm not sure, but everybody said that we caught committing UI fraud, that everybody was doing it, right? It's just like, this was the thing to do. This and PPP fraud was like the thing to do. Everyone was doing it. Can't believe you caught me. What about this person? They weren't as stupid. Okay, so this picture over here on the left, like I said, I got the license plate. What we did here, right, so we still didn't know our suspect, right? We had the images, excuse me, from KeyBank. Mostly have the mask on, but there were a couple of images where you could see the person's face. So didn't really know who that was yet, right? So I'm running the registrations on this Mercedes here, and get the owner of that car, and the address is associated with my investigation related to the UI fraud, right? So we get into Facebook through our forensics folks. We go to Facebook and we start looking through Facebook of the registered owners of the white Mercedes. And lo and behold, there's a Facebook Live recorded video of what we see here in the middle of our suspect and the registered owner of the car having a sing-along in their car, driving someplace, having a good old time. But I got that picture. So I said, hey, Crime Analysis Center, can you help me try to identify who this individual is? Yes, they can help me verify it and identify who this individual is. And we found that our individual, James Johnson, had a lengthy criminal history of fraud, spent, I think, 6 years in the federal prison system for very similar identity theft and fraud from several years ago. So we knew that we were obviously onto something at this point. So, thank you. Okay, so at this point, this is several months in. Now we have our suspect. And these things we've confirmed through various subpoenas and other, investigative steps that we've taken. So we've confirmed that we have an address where these people are residing and the fraud's happening at, and that was through the IP addresses, telephone numbers, and all that kind of good stuff. And also they have welfare benefits going to that address and National Grid account in their name. So that was good. So, as I said, we were trying to go from pattern of life. We wanted to figure out when they were going to swipe these benefits. It's like, if they certify on this date, how many days later are they actually going to it? So we kind of tried to figure it out a little bit. And one day we were trying, and sure as hell if we didn't get pretty lucky. The physical security photo here on the left, the residence that she lived in was fairly close to our office down here in downtown Albany. So I drove up the street, nothing really going on at the house. And as I get up to the intersection, they're driving towards me in the Maserati. So I'm like, oh great, let's see what's happening. So I start following them, and they head towards where you pick up 787 downtown. I'm like, oh my goodness, they're going to East Greenbush. I'm like, this is exactly where I thought they were going. This is where they're going. We're going to follow them there and actually watch a transaction happen. Right? So that's what I thought was happening. That's not what happened. They take a right instead of a left to go up 787, and instead go to the U-Haul storage facility in downtown Albany, right? The big one down there near the highway, right? So they're in there for like 35 minutes, 45 minutes. They get out, get back in the car, hop on the highway. Head up to Central Avenue, and there is, unbeknownst to me, I had no idea it was even a thing, there's a Bitcoin ATM at this gas station on the left on Central Avenue. So we said, oh my goodness, what's going on in there? We thought it was just an ATM. So fortunately, there's a Dunkin' Donuts in this gas station as well. So I went in and got a coffee, snapped that photo of our suspect in the very back there, utilizing the ATM, which basically is put cash in that machine, and then you get Bitcoin. And then, so we got that. So after we left there, followed them back down to Albany, and ended the surveillance, we kind of got what we wanted. So the next day, I go down to the U-Haul storage facility. I chart my way into their computer system, and I get on the phone with my investigative counsel. That was basically my partner on this case. And I said, hey, give me data points. I need telephone numbers, email addresses, addresses, anything that I can query the system on to find what they were doing here. And I found it. That phone number, the 917 phone number, the address, or the phone number that we had on the UI claim for our first victim, was the same phone number they used to rent a U-Haul storage locker in that storage facility. So we obviously, that name is bogus. The email address we did find out to be one of the email addresses for our suspect, and that address was very familiar to us as well. So once we got that information kind of squared away, we had enough to get to file search warrants in federal court. So we went to our partners. We were working with the U.S. DOL and several agencies, which we'll get to in a little while, and we got search warrants, and we executed them very shortly thereafter. And in this execution of the search warrants, this is where we were able to utilize some of our experience in data forensics. This is what we found through the actual search warrant, right? We took 7 mobile phones, 3 SD cards, and a computer. And in the review, we identified 39 unique NYGov accounts on the devices themselves, 19 unique claims on those devices. And on here, we only list 18 unique public assistance recipients because that was my focus. There were 39 accounts on there, but we were focused on the public benefit recipients. Excuse me. Also, during the search warrants, we found $242,000 in cash in a safe at that U-Haul facility, along with most of those cell phones and that computer, actually. So we got into that safe, and that's basically what we found in there. And then we, like I mentioned earlier, we seized that Maserati because we were able to prove enough to say that that Maserati was purchased with stolen UI funds. So that's that. Also, in the house, we found all sorts of designer items, as you can imagine, and that we all took, and it was ended up being sold at auction. I think the most expensive thing was a $17,000 Celine bag, which was very nice. There was a Rolex. I don't remember what the value of that was. I think the watches were handled, I think, differently, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, tons of this merchandise that we had to get appraised and sold at auction. So while we were looking through these cell phones that we seized during the search warrant, we found a text message between the victim, my victim, the UI fraud victim, and the suspect, Big Mama. I pulled this out because, you know, what she's saying here piqued my interest, right? What she's indicating is that she has an insider at the Department of Labor helping her commit this fraud, right? That's what the indication is here. And obviously she's threatening the victim here, and here, threatening her. But essentially they're saying, hey, she's telling me that there's a bad a DOL employee. So when we found that information, obviously it being state IG's office as well, we're very interested in that, right? We know that that was occurring during this time period, that there were some people that were working at some of these agencies that were doing not the right thing. But so we took that and we ran with that. And we attempted to find any connection between our suspect in this case and any DOL employee, and we didn't find that particular connection on this case. So what we did find out is through talking to the suspect that she was full of it. She was just telling this lie to people to create a separation of the fraud, saying, listen, if there's a problem with what you're supposed to get on the fraud, on the payout for the fraud, if there's a problem, it's not me, it's my sister who works at DOL. She's the one doing it. It's not my fault, so don't hold me accountable. But there was no sister. So, so we didn't arrest her at the time of the search warrant. We wanted to see kind of what the next moves were. So we did find out that she was ready to board a flight to go out of international air travel. We were going to depart out of JFK or LaGuardia, one of them. So we got an arrest warrant issued, and we had a team of Homeland Security agents at the airport waiting to pick her up before she boarded the flight. Never showed up for the flight, so that was a bust. So we ended up just traditionally going to her and saying, hey, you need to turn yourself in. We caught you for fraud. And that's basically what we did. She had an attorney and turned herself in with her attorney. And she got charged with all of these things that you see up here. And eventually, after a couple of years, pled guilty and was sentenced to 41 months in federal prison and owes us $701,000. So the other thing about this case was, while we were doing this investigation, we realized that she wasn't acting alone. People were out there in the public basically soliciting individuals to sell them their personal identifying information. So we could term them bundlers. So these bundlers would say, hey, Jamie, I have a person that wants to sell their PII. Here it is. How much money are you going to give me for it? So, you know, the bundler gets a cut, and however they work out the deal with the victim, that's on them. But we identified the 3 bundlers in this case, all the people that funneled the accounts to Jamie Johnson, and they were all arrested and subsequently pled guilty, and they owe us some money too. A couple of them are going to prison. The last guy was pretty old, actually. Kind of got lucky there on his deal. But again, you know, this wasn't something that we could necessarily do on our own, but we were just helping bolster this case with our partners here. So we wouldn't have made this case without all of our partners here on this. It's the US DOJ, Crime Analysis Center was invaluable in this investigation. Postal inspectors were great, US DOL, state DOL, and Homeland Security was fantastic. So without those guys, we wouldn't have made this case. And then just circling back to DOL employee fraud, like I said, we struck out on that one particular instance. However, there were various employees that were caught and subsequently pled guilty and or are in the midst of pleading guilty to their crimes for misusing the system that we gave them access to. So lastly, you know, over that 4-year time period, this is kind of the results of the UI team's effort in our office. And I think that's pretty good. We've referred 14 cases to prosecutors. We got 19 guilty pleas out of that. That's pretty good. We have 2 arrests scheduled for the next 2 or 3 weeks. So that's good. Almost 1.7 restitution ordered and 240 in cash. It's not bad. I wish it was more cash. That would have been nice. But you know, all in, we identified $2.3 million in unemployment fraud during that time period, and hopefully we're taking a lot of that money. So I think that is the end. That's it.
So thank you very much. I think this, you know, hopefully this was a good example of how you can see how multiple sides of our house can actually work together, and sort of if it's a case that we can kind of team up with you on, you're going to bring the full resources of that on. Like you said, we can take cases and, you know, do them start to finish on our own, or if there's other resources that we can work together on, we can also just be partners in those investigations. So I hope you learned a little bit more. Maybe, you know, really the crux of it is also when you're doing your investigations, think outside the box, right? Maybe think, you know, is there something else I haven't thought of, or, you know, is there something, you know, in the cloud that we might want to get access to? I mean, those cloud written search warrants are so valuable because you can do them without your target even being aware you're on there. They're so different than going in and doing a physical search warrant. And like Matt said, you get access to a wealth of information without actually going over in your investigation. So again, thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? We're open for anything. Go ahead.
I just have one. With regards to that case example, was there any attempt or any success with determining, as far as Bitcoin is concerned, if there was like money in a Bitcoin bank or how much money passed through that Bitcoin ATM? I'm just curious as cryptocurrency stuff.
Likewise, me too. I don't know if you have any more information about that, but about the ATM, no, that was really just me. What we do know about ATM in this case is that with the help of our HSI partner, that's how we were able to figure out that Bitcoin was used to purchase that vehicle. So I wasn't necessarily in tune with how they came across that, but yeah, within the search warrants, there were Bitcoin wallets being exchanged on text message and stuff, so we had a list of various wallets, but at that point, HSI was going to help us do that particular aspect.
Yeah, and for this case specifically too with HSI, there were physical Bitcoin wallets, so we found a Trezor device on site during the search warrant, as well as electronic wallets there too. That originated back to Coinbase. So all those assets for these accounts were frozen at that time.
And I should just mention, when we do open up an investigation in our office, you're always going to have an investigative counsel and an investigator assigned to it, and then depending on the needs, will also be an auditor and or a do obviously run into cryptocurrency, so it's great to have their expertise on hand to say, what am I looking at